The Silent Equation, March 2nd, 1938. By the time I reached Professor Hecht's apartment in the Alsergrund, the police had already found the body, the maid had already decided it was murder, and Inspector Coller had already sold the truth twice. I knew Coller by sight. Everyone at the university knew him by sight. He had the face of a man who never hurried because other men did it for him. Flat cheeks, pale lashes, polished boots, and a cigarette always burning down untouched between two fingers. He stood in the professor's hall as if he owned the wallpaper. "He killed himself," he said before I asked. "Did you arrive in time to hear him say so?" His eyes moved to me, slow and uninterested. "You're Faber." "I worked for him." "You took notes for him. That is not the same thing. In Vienna, even before the Germans crossed the border, rank was the cheapest narcotic in the city. Uniforms inhaled it. Priests inhaled it. Professors inhaled it. Men with nothing but stamped paper inhaled it until they forgot they were mortal. I took off my gloves and handed them to the maid, Frau Moser, who was shivering so violently I thought at first she had been crying. Then I saw she was angry. "He did not kill himself," she said. "He was too tidy." Coller smiled at that. It was the kind of smile one reserves for women and weather. "Gas is tidy enough," he said. Professor Julius Hecht lay on the floor of his study with one arm bent under him and one shoe turned half off, as if he had lost interest in dressing midway through a thought. The gas stove valve was open. The room still carried that sweet, metallic heaviness coal gas leaves behind when it has done its work. Coller had opened the window, but not enough to erase the smell. You cannot air out a verdict. Hecht's face was grey. His spectacles had fallen beside the leg of the desk. One lens was cracked. On the blotter lay an uncapped fountain pen, a glass ashtray with no ash in it, and a rectangle of dust where a notebook should have been. That absence hit me harder than the body. Professor Hecht kept everything: student essays, old proofs, railway timetables from before the inflation, a postcard from Göttingen bearing the handwriting of a man dead 15 years. He believed paper deserved a chance to survive even when people did not. If a notebook was missing, it had not wandered. I turned toward the desk. "Careful," Coller said. I looked back. "Do you imagine I'll disturb the suicide?" He held my gaze for a moment and then shrugged. That was Vienna, too. Contempt so practiced it passed for manners. On the desk, under a sheaf of correspondence, was a small ledger written in Hecht's hand. Not a research notebook, a payments book, dates, initials, amounts, no explanations. 50 shillings here, 100 there, cigarettes, cognac, a gold coin marked only with the initials FS. The last 3 entries had all been made in the previous week. FM 20, OK, 300. IW, packet/no money. My own initials were not there. I do not know whether that hurt me or relieved me. "What is it?" Coller asked. "Housekeeping. That's a poor lie for a mathematician." I closed the ledger and slipped it under the stack where I had found it. Not because I trusted him not to see it, because I wanted him to know I had seen it. He saw me notice the empty space on the desk. "You're looking for something." "He always kept a black notebook here." "Not today." "Who was here before me?" "Besides the dead man?" I said nothing. Coller took a final pull on his cigarette and crushed it with unnecessary care into the empty ashtray. "The maid," he said, "a doctor, myself, a priest for 5 minutes because the old woman downstairs made noise, and a gentleman from the ministry." "What ministry?" "The kind that sends gentlemen." He was being evasive for pleasure now, which is the vice of men whose corruption has ripened into style. I turned to Frau Moser. "Who found him?" She folded her hands into her apron, but her eyes stayed hard. "I brought his coffee. He had not come down. The room was shut. I smelled it before I opened." "Was anything different yesterday?" "Yes." "What?" "He was frightened." That word did not fit the professor easily. Julius Hecht had spent 20 years being rude to men who could end his career with a stamp. He was 63, bald, dry, and so exact in speech that every sentence sounded as if it had already been revised twice in his head before reaching air. Fear did not suit him. "How do you know?" I asked. "He paid cash." That was Vienna too. Hecht had lived on salary, lecture honoraria, and debts no one pressed because his mind was valuable in a narrow, unfashionable way. He had never paid cash for anything if paper could be made to carry the embarrassment. The ledger on the desk suddenly seemed less like housekeeping and more like a map. Coller drifted toward the bookshelf. "You may have 10 minutes, Faber. Then I close the room." "Why?" "Because the city is full of the living." I hated him immediately, and for the right reasons. When he stepped into the hall to speak to one of his men, I bent over the desk. Hecht had a habit of hiding notes under notes, as if he trusted layers more than locks. Beneath the blotter, I found a half-sheet folded 3 times. On it, in his tight hand, were 6 lines. Not formulas, sentences. A statement may contain the record of its own future inscription. A record may precede the event when the archive is large enough. The speaker is not outside the archive. Therefore, every sentence has a witness not yet born. Follow the substitutions until no voice remains exterior. Stop before the list. Below that, a single line underlined twice. If I am dead, assume I paid badly. I had worked in mathematical logic for 3 years. I knew fixed-point constructions, self-reference, semantic closure, and the kind of men who ruined their sleep trying to turn one into the other. But this was not a proof. It was a set of instructions written as if proof had already failed. I slipped the page inside my coat. When I straightened, Ilse Weiss was standing in the doorway. I had seen her at the Institute for months, usually in the library stacks or the typing room, usually carrying more paper than a body ought to manage without bending. She was 28, perhaps 29, with dark hair pinned more severely than fashion allowed, and the kind of face that never looked softened by agreement. Her father ran a print shop near Leopoldstadt. She had taken courses at the university, finished none of them formally, and knew more about the movement of books through Vienna than most professors knew about the movement of their own thoughts. She did not ask Coller's permission to enter. "Is it true?" she asked me. "Yes." "Did they find the notebook?" Coller turned back from the hall. "What notebook?" Ilse did not look at him. "The one that made Paul Rener stop speaking," she said. The room changed, only slightly, but enough. Coller's expression did not move. That was the alarming part. "Who is Paul Rener?" he asked. Ilse smiled then, once, without warmth. "That is your profession, Inspector." He took 2 steps toward her. "In difficult weeks," he said, "a city can become very expensive for people who mistake boldness for immunity." She finally looked at him. "In easy weeks, too. There are women who speak like they are flirting with danger, and women who speak like they have already done the arithmetic. Ilse was the second kind." Coller studied her face, then turned away as if she had ceased to matter. Men like him did that when they were making lists. 10 minutes, he said again to me, and left. Ilse waited until his footsteps had gone down the corridor. "You found something." I hesitated only long enough to understand that she would notice the hesitation. "A page. And not mathematics." "Good," she said. "Mathematics is always the first lie in these things." That sounds theatrical. "So does a professor dead with the gas turned on." She stepped into the room and closed the door. Not all the way, just enough. "He gave me a packet yesterday," she said. "Told me if German cars came first, I was to burn it unread. If priests came first, I was to hide it in plain sight. If you came first, I was to ask whether you still believed that truth lives outside institutions." I stared at her. "What did you tell him?" "That you believed it on Tuesdays." Even then, with Hecht dead on the carpet between us, I nearly laughed. Instead, I said, "Where is the packet?" "In the library. Where else?" "You read it." "No." "You're lying." "Not well enough to matter." She looked down at Hecht then, and for the first time something in her face gave way. Not grief exactly, something colder, recognition perhaps. As if the professor's death had confirmed a structure she had hoped was only rumor. He knew they'd come, she said quietly. Who? All of them. That afternoon I went first to the Institute and then to Paul Rener. The library at the Mathematical Institute smelled of glue, coal dust, and old paper. Outside, the city had the grey, strained look Vienna wore in March when winter wanted one last argument. Students moved through the corridors faster than usual. Notices were being pulled down as quickly as they were posted. Someone had chalked a swastika on the side gate overnight. Someone else had scrubbed it off badly. The shape remained as a shadow. Ilse met me in the stacks and handed me the packet without ceremony. There were 3 pages, she said. I read one line before I stopped. What line? She was right, Ilse said. Mathematics was the first lie. Inside the packet were 3 torn notebook pages and a tram ticket used as a bookmark. The pages were numbered in Hecht's hand, but the numbering had been revised, crossed out, reordered. Each page began like a proof and ended like testimony. Page 4 described a chain of substitutions by which statements about statements could be converted into statements about records of statements. Page 7 contained a strange paragraph on future clerical closure and a margin note in Latin, omni nomen querit archivum. Every name seeks an archive. Page 9 was worse. Page 9 contained names. Not identities I recognized, just names. Common surnames, initials, dates, some with place names beside them, some with numbers. At the bottom, in pencil, and apparently added later, a single word, hören, listen. This is what Paul saw, I asked. Part of it. What happened? He stopped in the middle of a sentence and looked at me as if I'd begun to die in front of him. Where is he? Sanatorium at Steinhof. Nervous collapse, the director said. Convenient phrase. I folded the pages and put them back in the envelope. You should leave the city, I said. She leaned against the shelf. With what passport? Your father has money. My father has paper. Vienna has made them different. We looked at one another in the dim aisle between journals. Outside, somewhere in the building, a door banged and a male voice laughed too loudly. Hecht paid people, I said. I know. I found a ledger. I know that too. How? Because he asked me to deliver an envelope to the porter on Monday and another to a priest on Tuesday. He said the city was safer when everyone expected to be dishonorable. That sounds like him. Yes, she said. It also sounds like a man hiding something in a place where honesty had already stopped functioning. It was the truest thing anyone had said to me all day. What did you see in the line you read? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, a sentence about a witness not yet born. And I had the very clear feeling that the page knew my full name. I did not answer that. I had no answer that did not embarrass the part of me still loyal to discipline. Paul Rener lay in a white room above the city, looking less ill than emptied. He had been Hecht's other assistant, older than me by 10 years, more gifted in proof, less suited to rooms containing living people. A week earlier, he had corrected a footnote in my seminar notes with such surgical contempt that I had gone home and rewritten the entire talk out of spite. Now he sat propped in bed with a blanket over his knees and watched the window as if expecting it to open into weather no one else could see. The doctor gave me 5 minutes. He speaks? I asked. Not to us. To anyone? The doctor spread his hands. Silence is also a kind of decision. Paul turned when I sat beside the bed. His eyes were clear, too clear. He had lost the ordinary blur of social life. He looked like a man who had burned through all tolerable illusions and found nothing behind them but paperwork. It was Hecht's notebook, I said. Wasn't it? He did not blink. Did he show it to you? Nothing. I took page 4 from my coat and held it where he could see the margin. His gaze fell to it, then moved away instantly like a man flinching from a flame without moving the rest of his body. You understood part of it. His fingers twitched on the blanket. Paul, I said, and the tenderness in my voice surprised me. I can't help him now. I can only help the living, if there's still a difference. He reached to the bedside table, found a pencil, and wrote 3 words on the back of a prescription form. Not God, ledgers, trains. Then he put the pencil down and closed his eyes. When I left the room, the doctor asked, "Did he say anything?" "Yes," I said. "But what?" "That he intends to live." The lie came easily. I disliked how easily. That evening, alone in my room off the Währinger Strasse, I read page 4 again by the weak yellow light over my desk. I began where Hecht always began, with the assumption that if a system could name its own statements, it could eventually name their storage. And if it could name their storage, it could in principle name the future moment of storage provided. The later archive was sufficiently large, rigid, and repetitive. That much was still mathematics, or at least still within shouting distance of it. But Hecht was not shouting distance from anything by the time he wrote these pages. The structure on page 4 led to page 7. Page 7 led to a paragraph I read 3 times without wanting it to be legible. Hecht argued that if a bureaucracy ever became large enough to record the fate of language itself, who spoke, who denounced, who signed, who disappeared, then a closed formal sequence might couple backward to the future archive, not by prophecy, but by reference, not prediction, contact. He had written the next line twice. The future is easiest to hear where it has become clerical. I put the page down and stood up too fast, knocking my chair over. In the street below, a tram groaned around the bend. Somewhere a radio was playing waltz music, too thin through the wall to sound human. I wanted suddenly, with the kind of longing children feel for lost rooms, to go back a week to when a theorem was a theorem and a dead man was only a dead man. Instead, I put on my coat and went back out into Vienna. The first bribe I paid was to our porter, Franz Halama. He took cigarettes, not cash. Men chose their vices the way states chose flags, on the basis of old humiliations and practical weather. Franz kept the keyboard at the institute and saw more than any dean. He also smelled of cabbage and floor polish and preferred not to be asked direct questions while sober. He let me into the boiler room after I handed him the packet. "You're late?" he said. "For what?" "For the city." He lit one cigarette from another, which was a form of prayer among poor men. "Who came for Hecht?" I asked. "Who didn't?" "Names," he exhaled sideways. "A priest in black with soft hands, a man from police with hard hands, a German doctor with no hands at all." "No hands?" "He touched nothing. Those are the worst kind." "Did they come together?" "No, they never do. Vienna's filth is proud. It likes separate entrances." I leaned against the coal bin. "What did Hecht pay you for?" Franz looked at the cigarettes in his palm, weighed honesty against tobacco, and chose a temporary middle. "He paid me to lose a key for 1 hour on Monday, and to remember a locker number on Wednesday." "Which locker?" He told me. It was at the Nordbahnhof, left luggage room, locker 117. Hecht had rented it for 2 days under a false name so clumsy it had to have been deliberate. Inside, I found a brown envelope, a cheap rosary, and 2 pages of the notebook. The envelope contained no money. The rosary had a single black bead chipped near the cross. The pages were numbered 11 and 13. Page 11 was headed "On the Administrative Afterlife of Speech." Page 13 was only names. No proofs, no derivation, just lines of typed-looking handwriting beneath place names I did not know and dates that had not yet happened. One entry, underlined so hard the paper had nearly torn, read I. Weiss, transport list, October 1941. I read it twice. Then a third time, because denial is just repetition with better manners. Below her name was another, M. Faber, statement signed, October 1941, no place name, no details. Just the fact of a statement and the month. I folded the page and put it away very carefully, because panic always makes me tidy. When I showed it to Ilse that evening in Café Herrenhof, I kept my finger over the lower half. She took the page, read her name, and looked up at once. "What is this?" "I don't know yet." "You're lying." "I'm trying not to." Outside, men were pasting posters over one another so quickly the walls looked diseased. The café had thinned in recent weeks. Writers had left. Actors had left. Men with foreign wives had suddenly developed professional reasons to travel. The people who remained were the ones who still believed habit was stronger than history. Ilse kept her eyes on me. Whose handwriting? Hecht's! He invented my future. I don't think that's what he thought he was doing. Then what did he think? I took out page 7 and let her read the Latin line. She read it and set the page down. This is not theology, she said. No, this is not mathematics. I know. Then what is it? I looked at the tablecloth between us, at the small coffee stains shaped like a country not yet erased. A way of hearing records before they exist. She smiled once, bitterly. That is a very Viennese form of damnation. The waiter brought our coffee without being asked. He had known us both too long. I watched his hand shake as he set down the cups. What's wrong with everyone? Ilse said quietly. The Germans are coming. They have been coming for 5 years. Now everyone believes it. She folded the pages and returned them. Do not show me my own death again unless you know what it means. It may not be death. Then it is transport. We are not cattle, Matthias. I had not realized until that moment that I had been thinking of her as someone temporarily spared by technical confusion. The page corrected me. The page did not care what category she preferred. What did Hecht pay you for? I asked. She stirred coffee she was not going to drink. He paid me to keep a packet unread and to deliver a rosary to Father Severin Lenz, the priest. Yes? Why you? Because I look harmless to Catholics and literate to professors. That combination is rare, only because you seldom leave the institute. It would have been a flirtation if the year had been different. Instead, I said, take me to him. Father Severin Lenz received us in a side room of the Jesuit residence off the Universitätskirche, where the walls were lined with books that had survived other panics and expected to survive this one too. He was not what I had imagined from Franz's description. Not soft-handed. The hands were thin, scarred across the knuckles and stained with ink. He wore his collar like a concession rather than an identity. He knew Hecht was dead before we told him. He paid well, the priest said. That usually means farewell. On the table between us lay the chipped rosary from the locker. Father Severin touched the broken bead with one finger. He put page 12 inside this, he said. You opened it. I am a priest, not a parcel service. He handed me a folded sheet. Page 12 was headed on names that return from their filing. Halfway down, in the margin, Hecht had written a sentence that made my throat tighten. If the archive becomes monstrous, the sequence will no longer yield propositions, but names. Below that, in a darker ink, was a second hand, not Hecht's. God does not write in clerical German. I looked up. Father Severin shrugged. It seemed important. You read this and kept reading? No, I read that line and stopped. Why? Because I have spent 20 years distinguishing divine silence from bureaucratic silence. Your professor was trespassing. Ilse stood at the window with her back to us. He called it contact, I said. He would. With what? Father Severin considered me in a way I did not enjoy. Priests have been trained for centuries to sit still while other people volunteer their weaknesses. Mathematicians do it less elegantly. You are young, he said. That makes you proud of the wrong things. That is not an answer. It is the beginning of one. You imagine revelation must be radiant. You imagine contact, if it exists, must ennoble what receives it. But most power in this century travels as administration. Orders, ledgers, signatures, seals. What if your professor found a structure capable of coupling thought to the future by means of whatever future structure became most repetitive? The archive, I said. Yes. Then why the names? Because names are what archives become when they ripen into appetite. I thought of Paul Rener's scribble. Not God. Ledgers. Trains. Father Severin reached into the drawer of the table and took out a thin envelope. He placed it between us and kept one finger on it. Hecht asked me for a judgment, he said. Not absolution. Judgment. He wanted to know whether what he had found belonged to mathematics, theology, or the police. I told him theology would only lie to him more politely. And the police? They were already lying. What did you tell him? He looked at Ilse first, then back at me. I told him this. If the sequence is real, it will not reveal God. It will reveal whatever future institution becomes large enough to keep books on souls. No one spoke. Then he slid the envelope toward me. There is one more page, he said. I should burn it. Instead, I am giving it to a mathematician and a printer's daughter. That is how little confidence I retain in vocation. What do you want in return? Ilse asked. Father Severin smiled at that, but tiredly. Tell me the truth if you live long enough to find it. There are some bargains one accepts because refusing them would require admitting fear. I took the envelope. On our way out, a Monsignor I did not know stopped me in the corridor. Herr Faber, he said. A word. His cufflinks alone could have fed a family for a month. We are all trying, he said softly, to prevent unnecessary disorder. Is that what this is called now? In certain weeks, he said, words must be chosen with care. He slipped an envelope into my hand. It was thick. He did it so smoothly I almost admired him. What is this? A donation to your professional discretion. The Church has no wish to see speculative material fall into political custody. Bribery in a cassock is still bribery. Everything in Vienna is being laundered through a costume, he said. Do not be provincial. I gave the envelope back. He did not take it. When I forced it into his pocket, his smile vanished. Do not mistake scruple for safety, Herr Faber. I don't, I said. I mistake it for exhaustion. Outside, Ilse asked, how much? I didn't count. That means it was enough. We were halfway across the square when she stopped walking. A car, she said. I turned. A dark Opel stood at the curb opposite the church, idling. The driver remained invisible. In the back seat sat a man with a hat pulled low, reading a newspaper without turning the page. Ilse had already started moving again. We're being followed, I said. Yes. By whom? In this city? By anyone who can afford petrol. That night, Dr. Erhard Vogt invited me to supper. He used the phrase invited in the note. The note came by messenger on good paper with my full name and the address of a restaurant I could never have paid for voluntarily. That is how wealth threatens in stable countries. In unstable ones, it simply arrives sooner. Vogt was younger than I expected, 40 perhaps, clean-shaven, precise, with a doctor's manners and a banker's eyes. He wore civilian clothes too well. Men in honest professions generally carry traces of them. Chalk on cuffs, ink on fingers, the forward lean of a clerk, the stoop of a surgeon. Vogt had no residue. He was whatever the room required. He did not ask whether I wanted wine. He ordered it. I understand you were close to Professor Hecht, he said. I understand you were not. A faint smile. Closeness is overrated, access is plainer. The restaurant was half empty. In the mirrored wall behind him, I could see the waiter pretending not to watch us. What do you want? I asked. A notebook. He kept dozens. Not the one I mean. I let the silence lengthen. Vogt unfolded his napkin. Your professor was working on a sequence of semantic substitutions with unusual effects on suggestibility and verbal persistence. Suggestibility. Yes. You make it sound medical. It is administrative, he said. Medical only at the edges. And what edges are those? The edges where a man is encouraged to stop lying. I thought of Paul Rener's empty eyes. You've tested it. One does not test a theorem. One verifies an effect. On whom? He smiled into his glass. On men the state had already decided not to miss. The wine turned sour in my mouth. You want a weapon? I want clarity. Weapons are simply clarity arranged by office. You should teach rhetoric. It would save time. He leaned back. I know about Ilse Weiss. He said it casually. That was the point. I kept my face still. Do you? Her father owes taxes he cannot pay because publishers stopped paying printers on time. Her family name is wrong for the weather. She has no visa, no patron, and too much intelligence to pass unnoticed. Men like Inspector Coller are already writing down her address because it may become useful to have written it down. I said nothing because anything I said would have acknowledged the strike. Vogt placed a key on the table between us. "Room 22 at the Hotel Regina," he said. "Tomorrow morning. If the notebook is there, I will ensure her father's tax file is lost and her family is not bothered again this month." This month? He looked at me almost kindly. I dislike false promises. They cheapen negotiation. Why tell me any of this? Because Professor Hecht understood too late that moral disgust is not a strategy. It merely slows the hand while history picks the pocket. He stood. "I do not need the whole notebook, Faber. Only the order of the pages." Then he left me with the bill he had already paid and the key still lying on the table like a surgical instrument. I kept it. That is the sentence I would like to remove from the record if records were sentimental enough to oblige. I kept it. Told myself I wanted time, leverage, the illusion of choice. In truth, I kept it because corruption is never experienced internally as corruption. It arrives dressed as exception, emergency, context, love. When I reached Ilse's father's print shop near midnight, the front window had already been smashed. Paper lay across the floor like dirty snow. The press rollers had been cut. Herr Weiss sat on a stool among the wreckage with blood on his cheek and a police summons in his hand. Ilse stood over him with a bowl of water and a face so still it looked sculpted. "Who did this?" I asked. "Boys," Herr Weiss said, "and then men." "Police?" "The boys first, police after. That is our modern sequence." Ilse took the summons from him and gave it to me. A hearing. Tax irregularities, immediate appearance. "He won't survive a month of visits," she said. Her father made a dismissive movement, but the hand shook. I took out the hotel key and put it on the table between the broken type trays. She looked at it, then at me. "Where did you get that?" "A bargain." "With whom?" "Vogt." Her eyes hardened in a way I felt physically. "What did you promise?" "Nothing." "Then why would he give it to you?" "He didn't. He gave me a test." "Those are the same thing." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. Worse, I wanted to tell her that a temporary lie in service of protection did not yet count as betrayal. But her father was sitting in the wreck of his own shop, holding a summons written by a state already leaning into another one, and the words would not hold. "There may be money there," I said. "You took his money?" "I took a key. Matthias." She said my name the way other people say stop. "We need the hearing to disappear," I said. "If Coller can be paid—" "Everything can be paid," she said. "That is why nothing can be trusted." She turned away from me and went back to mopping blood from her father's face with a tenderness that made my own usefulness look mechanical. The next morning, room 22 held no money, only a second envelope. Inside was a photograph of Professor Hecht entering the Jesuit residence 3 days before his death, and a typed note: "Do not let the church baptize what belongs to administration. Bring page order by Thursday. Otherwise, Weiss file proceeds." No signature. At the bottom, handwritten in pencil: "Ask Coller what 300 shillings bought." Inspector Coller was in a cafe off the Schottenring when I found him, spooning whipped cream into his coffee as if dairy were the last stable institution in the Republic. He did not look surprised to see me. "Have you come to confess?" he asked. "I'm not your church." "Wise, mine is losing market share." I sat opposite him. "What did Hecht pay you for?" He kept eating. "You imagine because a dead man wrote my initials in a ledger you now have standing to audit me." "I imagine because you called it suicide before the body was cold." I said the room smelled of gas. "You closed the file." He set the spoon down, at last. 300 shillings, he said. "Bought 48 hours. "For what?" "For not letting the ministry touch his papers. You took his money and still let them in. After 48 hours. "You sold him out." "No," Coller said. "I sold him time. In Vienna, that is often the more expensive favor." He leaned closer. "Listen carefully. Your professor came to me 5 days before he died. He said certain pages might produce panic, extortion, religious stupidity, and German curiosity. I told him he had just described the whole city. He paid me to make the investigation small and private if he turned up dead. He also asked whether there was any official procedure for a document that should not be read but could not be destroyed. And you said? I told him there was not enough paper in Austria for that category. I believed him, which annoyed me. Who else was on his payroll? Coller smiled again. Now you ask the right question. He wrote 2 names on a napkin. Blumel, Gruber. Blumel I know, I said. Who is Gruber? Undertaker, Döbling Cemetery, paid in gold. Why would Hecht bribe an undertaker? Coller folded the napkin once and slid it to me. Why does anyone bribe an undertaker? To improve the company. Before I could stand, he added, Vogt will offer you rescue in installments. Do not mistake that for mercy. Germans dislike owing gratitude to the people they save. And what do you like? Coller lifted his cup. Being paid in advance. March 5th, 1938. Professor Otto Blumel was dean by cowardice and by timing, which is how most men reach office. He had once published useful work on analytic number theory and had spent the rest of his life converting early promise into committee authority. He kept his rooms overheated and his conscience in the same condition. He denied everything until I showed him the hotel note. Then he denied less. I let Vogt into the institute after hours once, he said. Twice, perhaps. He represented a German scientific society with legitimate interest in Professor Hecht's work. He represented extortion. Do not be childish. The political weather is changing. The weather did not ask for keys. No, Blumel said quietly. It asked for survival. He stood up and crossed to the window, looking down into the courtyard where 2 students were arguing under bare branches. Young men like you still imagine institutions are made of principles. They are made of corridors. Whoever controls the corridor decides which principle arrives at the room. And you sold the corridor. I rented it. To whom? He turned. To the future. That answer would have impressed me once. Now it only made him look more Austrian. What did Hecht pay you for? I asked. He laughed softly. Nothing. He offered me contempt, which was his native currency. I took Vogt's instead. He opened a drawer and handed me a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. I was told to keep this sealed until Monday, he said. After Monday, I was told it no longer mattered. By Hecht? Yes. Why give it to me now? He shrugged. Because Sunday sermons do not defend careers. German appointments do. Inside the parcel was page 15 and a single strip of paper bearing an address in Döbling. Page 15 was nearly illegible, not from damage, from density. The page had been written over, scraped, amended, and overwritten again until it resembled a palimpsest of panic. I made out only fragments, not prophecy. Future record closes present sentence. The first pages seemed abstract because the future had not yet chosen its clerks. After closure, it becomes list. If they read it completely, they will know who can be made to speak. That last line was underlined so hard the nib had cut through. When I found Ilse that evening, Father Severin's envelope in one pocket and the undertaker's address in another. She was in the back room of her father's shop, setting broken type back into trays by hand, as if order might survive by sheer repetition. You look tired, she said without looking up. I met with Blumel. And? He sold access. That narrows Vienna to Vienna. I handed her page 15. She wiped ink from her fingers and read. Halfway down she stopped. Who can be made to speak, she repeated. Yes, that's what Vogt wants. That's what I think. She set the page down very carefully. My brother Ernst was arrested last year for carrying leaflets. Austrian police had him 3 days. When he came back, he said the questioning itself was not the worst part. He said the worst part was the small room beside the questioning room where a clerk wrote down what you would probably say tomorrow. Not what you said, What you would say when tired or when frightened or when your mother's medicine was mentioned. He said, "Terror no longer wants confession, it wants advanced paperwork." I listened. "Hecht found a way to hear that paperwork before it exists," she said. Or thought he did. "Do not hide behind grammar now." There was a knock at the shop door. We both went still. Herr Weiss came in from the front, holding an envelope and looking older than he had 12 hours earlier. "It's gone," he said. "What is?" Ilse asked. "The hearing, the tax file. Coller says there has been a clerical misunderstanding." Her eyes moved to me. I said nothing. "Who paid?" Herr Weiss asked. No one answered. At last Ilse said, "We'll speak later." She said it in the formal tone, not anger, a colder thing, accounting. That night I dreamed in columns, not numbers, names arranged under station titles I did not know. The columns moved like music without sound, and every few lines one name darkened as if chosen by a clerk's finger from another year. I woke with my jaw clenched so hard it ached. On March 7th, Schuschnigg announced the plebiscite, and Vienna began to sound different. Street conversations shortened. Radio voices sharpened. Men who had spent years calling themselves Austrian nationalists suddenly discovered a talent for waiting near telephones. The city was becoming speculative in the worst way. People no longer asked what was true, but what would be true if the Germans crossed first. That afternoon, Father Severin stopped speaking. The Jesuit brother who opened the residence door to me looked frightened enough to be honest. "He read another page," he said. "Which one?" He would not say. "Can he write?" The brother made the sign for maybe. Father Severin sat in the same room where we had met, but the room no longer belonged to scholarship. Papers lay stacked on the floor as if he had begun ordering them by some private rule, and then fallen out of language midway through the task. On the table before him was a single sheet covered with names of railway depots, police districts, and dates. He looked up when I entered. Recognition remained. So did intelligence. What had gone was the confidence that speech was fit for what he knew. I sat across from him. "You were right," I said. "It isn't God." He wrote one word. "Judgment." "That's theology." He struck the word through and wrote another. "Inventory." Then beneath it, "Same shape when men worsen." I stared at the page. He added 3 more words. "Burn all names." "Where are the rest?" He hesitated, then wrote, "Gruber kept one." Coller lied less than others. Vogt already has partial order. That meant time had shortened. I rose to leave. He caught my sleeve and wrote one final sentence in cramped, urgent Latin. "Qui audit primum nomen suum peribit in voce." I translated it automatically. Whoever hears his own name first will perish in his voice. On the tram back across the city, I repeated that line until it began to sound like one of Hecht's pages. Too precise to be wisdom, too strange to be anything else. Ilse was waiting outside my building when I arrived. She had no hat on despite the cold. Snow had caught in her hair and melted there. "My father says you paid Coller," she said. "I paid for delay." "With whose money?" I could have lied again. Instead, I told the truth because there are stages of corruption at which honesty becomes a luxury item. "Vogt's." She closed her eyes once. "When?" "The night the shop was attacked." "And you thought not telling me would improve the transaction?" "I thought telling you would make it unusable." She stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "Listen to me carefully. I know what men say to themselves when they take dirty money in clean emergencies. I have watched editors do it, priests do it, booksellers do it, judges do it. They never call it surrender. They call it temporary. They call it tactical. They call it the one exception that makes the next refusal possible. I did not give him anything. Not yet." That last phrase lodged under the ribs. I took out page 13 and handed it to her without warning. She looked down, saw her name, and went still. Then she looked farther. "What is this below it?" I did not answer. She read anyway. I saw the moment she reached my line, not the content. She didn't know content, only the shape of the entry. Her face did not change much. The injury was too clean for that. "Your name too," she said. "Yes." Then perhaps he bought less than you hoped. She folded the page and gave it back. What now? I asked. Now we finish it before Vogt does. You said not to trust dirty bargains. I said not to lie about them. She pulled on her gloves. There's a difference. In this city, it may be the last one. March 9th, 1938. Döbeling Cemetery was quiet in the particular way cemeteries are when the country around them has begun to rehearse mass death, but has not yet settled on method. Gruber, the undertaker, kept office behind the chapel in a room that smelled of candle wax, wet wool, and carpentry. He was broad, stooped, and offensively healthy-looking, as if the dead had failed to correct him into solemnity. When I showed him the gold coin Coller said Hecht had paid him with, he glanced only once at the date stamped on it and let us in. He said you might come late, Gruber told me. He said that? He said mathematicians mistake sequence for speed. That was Hecht, exactly. I had to look away for a moment. Gruber led us to the back workshop where coffin linings, crosses, and rolls of black cloth were stacked with tradesman's practicality. From a locked drawer, he produced a long envelope sealed with wax. He paid me to put this where no police clerk would wish to search, he said. Where was that? In his coffin pillow. He also paid me to tell no priest. Ilse gave a short, humorless breath that might have been laughter. What else did he pay you for? She asked. Gruber thought. To make the funeral earlier than the family preferred. Why? He said if he lay around too long, someone important would become curious. That, too, sounded like Hecht. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter and 2 final notebook pages, 16 and 17. We read the letter there in the undertaker's workshop between unfinished coffins. My dear Matthias, if the pages have reached you through Gruber, then Coller took my money. Blumel took German money, and Vienna remains faithful to itself. Good. One can build with that. You will be tempted to ask whether I discovered a theorem, a pathology, or a supernatural fraud. I discovered none of these. The early pages were mathematics. The later pages are not. They are a receiving structure. The sequence does not predict the future. It acquires reference to records that future institutions will be unable to resist creating. Once the archive exists, the closed sequence reaches backward toward it. In ordinary centuries, the effect would be trivial. Tax rolls, parish books, censuses. But our century is not ordinary, and our administrators are becoming grandiose. The structure has begun to return names. It returns first the names nearest the reader because conscience is the cheapest wire. That is why the weak call it divine and the practical call it useful. Both are wrong. It is contact with a future archive produced by men who will worship filing more than mercy. I scattered the pages by bribe because corruption is the only network still functioning faster than politics. If you are reading this, then at least one of my judgments about Vienna was sound. Do not complete the order unless forced by necessity greater than disgust. The final pages cease to resemble thought. They resemble office work after the collapse of pity. If Vogt obtains the complete order, he will use it to identify who can be broken, who can be induced to sign, and which names future terror will eventually require. That is to say, he will read bureaucracy as prophecy and help it become accurate. Burn everything if you can. If you cannot, then listen for the point at which the argument becomes a list. Stop before your own name. J. Hecht. I read the line about my own name twice because a mind will always return to the sentence that flatters its fear into centrality. Ilse took page 16 from my hand. The page began with prose and ended with columns. The prose was Hecht's attempt to explain the turning point. Once the sequence was complete enough, it no longer produced abstract closure. It produced extraction. Names, dates, districts, vehicle numbers, prison blocks, transport schedules, police forms, confessions not yet signed. Human administration future enough to count as revelation, but vulgar enough to remain human. At first, the notebook had looked like a proof. By the last pages, it looked like paperwork. Page 17 was almost entirely list. At the top, Hecht had written only, "Not from heaven." Below it, in increasingly cramped handwriting, were place names I had never seen and words that chilled me precisely because they were so ordinary. Deported, transferred, special treatment, statement signed, inventory received. Ilse found a chair and sat down without appearing to decide. Gruber pretended not to see our faces. Undertakers are more discreet than bishops, because discretion is integral to the trade rather than draped over it afterward. "Do you have all the pages?" I asked. "No," Ilse said. 17 is the highest number. "It isn't complete. See here." She pointed to the bottom corner where Hecht had written, "Order unresolved without 18." I looked up. Gruber said, "He left no other envelope." "What did he say about page 18? "He said if anyone ever asked, I was to tell them dead men are not complete either." Coller had said Vienna was full of the living. Gruber's workshop was full of the argument against that. "Who else knew?" I asked. "Only Hecht, and perhaps the priest if he guessed. There was also a woman." Ilse and I both turned. "What woman?" I said. "Dark coat, good shoes, came the morning after he paid me. Asked whether Professor Hecht had left anything in safekeeping. I said no." "Describe her." He did. Not Ilse, older, elegant. A woman from a ministry or a bank or a bishop's office. The sort who smelled of money without ever needing to mention it. "Did you see where she went?" "No. But she had a driver." Back in the street, Ilse lit a cigarette with hands she kept under strict control. "Page 18 is with the church or the Germans," I said, "or with someone who invoices both." I looked at her. "You've thought that since the beginning." She exhaled toward the bare trees. "My father prints for publishers, ministries, lawyers, parish offices, and newspapers. He says Vienna only has two real parties left, those who take envelopes and those who deliver them. What about the rest of us? We tell ourselves we're only reading." We returned to the institute and spread the recovered pages across Hecht's seminar table in the room where he had once skinned my first paper alive in front of 8 students, and then invited me to supper because, as he put it, sentiment belonged in music. Outside, the city was roaring faintly with politics. Somewhere a demonstration had started, or a counter-demonstration, or perhaps just the city practicing for annexation. I put the pages in order as best I could. 1, 4, 7, 9, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17. Missing 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 10, 14, 18. Too many gaps to complete the structure, honestly, but enough perhaps to infer the rest if one were reckless or skilled or doomed. "Don't," Ilse said. "I'm not doing anything. You're leaning forward in the Hecht way." I sat back. "You notice that?" "I notice most bad habits before their owners do." We spent 2 hours reconstructing the internal order. The early pages described self-reference. The middle pages established the shift from statements to records of statements, then from records to future storage. The late pages described the returning names. Page 18, whatever it was, would be where the sequence closed completely, where contact ceased to be theory and became receipt. Near midnight, while I was staring at a line on page 15 about the first person singular as future evidence, Ilse said, "What if Hecht is wrong?" "In what sense? What if the archive doesn't come from the future? Then where?" She did not answer immediately. "From us," she said at last. "From what we are already becoming." I rubbed my eyes. "That's rhetoric." "No, that's printing. Every form in the city already anticipates what will fill it. Name, district, confession, church tax, race, address. The paper waits longer than the people do." I thought of Vogt's phrase, clarity arranged by office. "You think the notebook isn't hearing the future," I said. "You think it's hearing the shape of administration before administration knows its own appetite." Maybe the difference no longer matters. That was a better line than most books deserved. There was a sound in the corridor, not loud. A shoe against stone. We froze. Another sound. Then the door handle moved. Ilse blew out the lamp. The room dropped into darkness so complete it felt deliberate. We stood without speaking while someone outside tried the handle once, twice, then let go. Footsteps retreated down the corridor. After a long moment, Ilse whispered, We moved the pages. To where? She laughed under her breath. Somewhere even professors won't look. The basement of Herr Weiss's print shop held 5 decades of obsolete type. Pamphlet waste, hymnals with misprinted dates, paper sacks of lead shavings, and one locked cabinet full of old forms. Nobody searched paper thoroughly until after they had won. Tyrants and accountants share that flaw. We hid the pages there before dawn. I should have slept. Instead, I went home and found a second note waiting under my door. No envelope this time, no courtesy. Tonight, page 18, Südbahnhof Freight Office. Come alone. If Weiss comes, she joins her future earlier. Unsigned, but no mistaking the hand. Vogt's pencil. Clean, pressure even, no flourish. I burned the note in the sink and watched the ash cling briefly to the enamel before washing away. My own reflection over the basin looked narrower than it had a week before. I went to the freight office at dusk with a pistol I did not know how to use, and 2 lies ready if no bullets proved necessary. The Südbahnhof freight office sat half empty under soot-black beams with ledgers piled like minor tombs against the walls. Outside, trucks rattled over wet cobbles. Inside, the air smelled of oil, paper, and old iron. Railways are the architecture of patience until states discover them. Vogt was there. So was Coller. That was the shape of Vienna. One man in polished civilian shoes, one in polished official leather, both pretending not to have expected the other. Between them on the desk lay a brown folder. No priest? I asked. Coller lit a cigarette. They dislike freight. Vogt did not bother with pleasantry. Page order. No. He nodded toward the folder. In exchange, page 18. You're lying. Yes, he said, but not about possession. Coller smiled at that. We've become efficient. I stayed standing. Who has it? Vogt said, a woman named Elsa Markwood, financial secretary to a church foundation that launders patriotic money into apologetic language. She was paid by both Rome and Berlin to keep certain correspondence from becoming too readable. Hecht gave page 18 to her because he believed greed was a stable safe box. Was he right? For 3 days. Coller exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. She tried to sell it twice, he said. That's the problem with neutrality. It develops overhead. Where is she now? Vogt said, dead. The words sat there without ornament. Accident? I asked. Everyone in Vienna is having accidents, Coller said. I looked from one to the other. Who killed her? Neither answered. Which was answer enough. Vogt opened the folder and slid a page toward me. It was not page 18. It was a copy, carbon, faint, with half the margin lost. At the top, completion condition. Below that, only one fully legible sentence. The reader first receives the sentence by which he will one day destroy what he most hopes to protect. My mouth went dry. Vogt watched me read. You see, he said quietly. Useful. Where is the original? Order first. Why should I trust either of you? Coller laughed softly. You shouldn't. Trust is for peacetime and sacramental wine. I set the carbon down. You already know part of the order. Not enough, Vogt said. Hecht scrambled the middle. Without closure, the effect is partial. Mutism, fragmentation, panic. We need the exact progression. We! His gaze did not change. Yes. The room seemed to narrow around that word. Not I, not they, we. The future already talking through him like office paper. He held out a second envelope. Inside is the tax file on Weiss, he said. Burned, and transit papers for her father. Prague, if used quickly. I stared at the envelope. Coller said almost gently, be careful. This is the point where men begin editing themselves for posterity. I do not know whether I moved first, or whether Vogt did. The moment broke like cheap glass. Coller lunged not for me, but for the folder. Vogt snatched it back. The chair went over. The pistol in my pocket seemed suddenly idiotic. I grabbed the desk instead, shoved, and everything on it slid, ledgers, ashtray, envelope, folder, onto the floor in a rain of paper. Coller swore. Vogt struck him across the mouth with the back of his hand, fast and efficient. I went for the folder. Someone hit me in the ribs. The room flashed white. When my vision cleared, I had the carbon page and not the folder. Coller had the envelope. Vogt had the pistol. He did not point it well. That saved me. I threw the chair at him, not heroically, desperately. The shot went into the ledger shelf. Paper burst behind me like startled birds. Coller crashed into Vogt from the side. I ran. I do not recommend running through a freight office under gunfire with no plan and poor lungs. But if you do, aim for darkness and trust bureaucracy to provide blind corners. By the time I reached the street, the carbon page was still in my hand and blood was running warm inside my coat from a split scalp I had not felt happen. Vienna was louder than the freight office. Men shouting headlines, radios through open windows, boots, bells from somewhere too far off to be church and too near to be weather. I got back to the print shop just after midnight. Ilse opened the basement door, took one look at my head and said, "You met civilization." I handed her the carbon page. She read the sentence and sat down on the crate behind her, as if her knees had not consulted her properly. "The sentence by which he will one day destroy what he most hopes to protect," she read again. "Yes." She looked up. That's why they stopped speaking. It was so plain once said that I hated all the pages for delaying it. The sequence did not merely return future names. It returned the future line, the signature, confession, denunciation, plea, report, by which the reader would become implicated in some later injury. Not random guilt. Not metaphor. The exact bureaucratic sentence by which a life would be transferred from love into record. Silence followed not from madness but from recognition. I sat opposite her and pressed my handkerchief to the cut in my hair. She looked at the pages in the cabinet, then at me. "How many of these have you read alone?" "Not enough." "That is not reassuring. It isn't meant to be." We listened for a moment to the city above us. A truck passed. Somewhere farther off, a crowd cheered something, or someone. One could no longer tell. Then Ilse said quietly, "If it shows you a sentence, do you have to speak it?" I did not answer at once. "I don't know," I said. Hecht thought the sequence coupled to records that would exist because institutions would insist on making them. Maybe reading it doesn't create the sentence. Maybe it only reveals the line along which pressure will find us. And if knowing the line makes it easier to step onto it? That was the real question. The mathematical question. The moral one, too. I thought of the envelope from Vogt, the key, the money, the hearing that had vanished because I had touched the wrong hand for the right reason. No one in Vienna became corrupt in a single flourish. It was done by installments, small clauses, temporary arrangements, grace periods. You learned the grammar of compromise long before you admitted you were speaking it. "We may already be in it," I said. Ilse said nothing. After a while she stood, took the pages from the cabinet and laid them out again on the crate between us. "Then we finish it," she said. "Not for them, for us." March 11th, 1938. The Chancellor resigned that evening, and Vienna went mad in a voice it had been rehearsing under its breath for years. By 6 o'clock, the streets were full of men carrying flags they had hidden in wardrobes, cellars, and righteous theories since the party had been banned. Radios shouted. Church bells competed with horns and boots. Windows opened. Names were tested in public for how easily they could be spat. The city had not changed its soul. It had merely stopped lowering its voice. From the print shop basement, the noise came down through the floorboards like weather under pressure. We had not slept. At dawn, I had gone back to the institute and found Father Severin's final note pushed under my office door in a young brother's hand. Only 6 words. Page 18 in Hecht's desk lining. I'd gone there at once. Coller's seal on the apartment had already been broken by events or opportunists. Hecht's study stood half ransacked, drawers open, books displaced, the air stale with old gas and newer theft. But the desk remained. Hecht had lined the underside of the center drawer with green felt 20 years earlier because the wood stuck in damp weather. Beneath the felt, carefully pasted flat, was page 18. He had hidden the last page in the one place he knew I would not search first because I believed too long in the drama of distance. We always imagine the last answer is in a church vault, a freight office, a foreign hand. Sometimes it is under our teacher's fingers all along. I brought it back to the print shop wrapped inside my shirt. Now it lay before us. Page 18 was very nearly blank. At the top, Hecht had written only, completion, read pages 1 to 18 in order without interruption. Stop when first proper name appears. Under that, in smaller hand, no one ever stops. There followed 3 paragraphs explaining why. The early pages trained the mind into self-reference. The middle pages shifted reference forward into future records. The later pages sharpened moral and administrative attention until the first proper name returned, the reader's own, or the one nearest the reader in consequence. At that moment, the sequence ceased being conceptual. It became personal. Almost no one turned away. Every mind wanted to know the first injury. Every mind believed it could bear one more line. That, Hecht wrote, was where speech ended. And below that, in a final sentence added later, and with more haste, if you reach the second proper name, the archive has entered you. Ilse read the page once and put it down. Second proper name? The first is yours or mine, I said. The second is whoever the future will take through us. That is ugly. It's exact. She looked up sharply. Do not start admiring it now. Above us, the city erupted into another wave of cheering. A door somewhere in the street below slammed hard enough to shake dust from the beams. What if we burn it? I said. Ilse looked at the pages. What if it's already written elsewhere? She was right. That was the monstrous thing in Hecht's theory. Destroying the pages would not destroy the future archive any more than smashing a thermometer cured fever. The notebook did not create the records. It received them, or so Hecht believed, or so I was beginning to fear. We arranged the pages in order for the last time. There were still gaps in the early numbering, but page 18's instructions and the internal references gave enough to reconstruct the sequence. Hecht had not left us a flawless object. He had left us a damaged bridge. Perhaps that was mercy, perhaps negligence. In Vienna by then, the distinction was too often just a matter of handwriting. Ilse stood by the cellar door with the pistol Vogt had dropped and I had taken from the freight office floor on my way out. She handled it better than I had. Are you certain? She asked. No. Good. She closed the bolt. I sat at the crate and began. The first pages were manageable. Self-reference, witness, future inscription, clerical closure. The mind disliked them but knew where to place the dislike. A familiar irritation. Logic when it begins to smell its own limits. Then the shift. Statement to record, record to storage, storage to future administrative completion. The sequence turned a corner there. I felt it physically, like stepping from pavement onto polished stone. Every proposition now pointed not backward toward proof, but forward toward paperwork. The future waited not as event, but as filing. I read on. The room grew very quiet, not silent. Quiet in the way a sick room is quiet when the body inside it has begun deciding something final without notifying the visitors. Above us, the city shouted. Below, the pages moved in my hands and my breathing changed to match the pace of the lines. I reached page 13. Names began. Not mine. At first, only strangers. A clerk in Linz, a woman in Brno, a priest in Graz, a railway number, a place name I did not know. Then more. Districts, pages from future forms, entries with stamps and abbreviations that meant nothing to 1938, and everything to what came after it. The notebook was no longer speculative. It had become office work from another decade. I heard my own pulse. Page 15. A phrase returned from the freight office carbon copy. The reader first receives the sentence by which he will one day destroy what he most hopes to protect. I should have stopped. Hecht had written that no one ever did. He was right. Vanity and dread share a spine. I read on. Page 16. The lists thickened. The handwriting changed subtly in places, as if later records had impressed themselves backward, not as content alone, but as texture. I saw place names I had never encountered. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, without understanding that they were not merely foreign but future enough to be obscene. Beside them were numbers too large to be household accounts and too cold to be population estimates. They looked like inventory because they were. My mouth had gone dry. Somewhere behind me I heard Ilse say my name softly. I kept reading. Page 17. The first proper name appeared. M. Faber. Statement signed. October 14th, 1941. The line struck with the force of a physical blow, not because it foretold my death, because it did not. It foretold my survival into paperwork. My hands began to shake. Stop, Hecht had written. Stop when first proper name appears. I read the next line. I. Weiss, detained on basis of above statement. October 17th, 1941. Transport docket follows. The room seemed to split cleanly down the center. I heard Ilse's step behind me, quick, and then stopped. She had seen my back stiffen. Perhaps she knew already. Perhaps the city had taught her too much about men, paper, and what either could do to a life. Matthias, she said, there are moments when the entire moral shape of a life reveals itself not in action but in the half-second before speech. I had one of those moments then. I meant to stop. I read the next line, and the archive entered. There is no good language for what followed because language was the organ being altered. The cellar did not vanish. The crate remained under my elbows. The lamp still hissed faintly. Outside, Vienna was shouting itself into another country. But over and through all of it came the pressure of written things not yet written in my year and already written in another. Forms, transfer notices, inventories, affidavits, stamped statements, confiscation lists, camp registers, death books, railway sheets, signatures repeated, until signatures stopped looking like names and became merely the shape a frightened hand leaves behind. The notebook did not show me the future as scenes. It showed me the future as record. And inside that record, with a clarity so cold it felt merciful only because mercy had no place left in it, I found the sentence. My sentence. A statement taken in October 1941 in a police office not yet reorganized under a ministry not yet renamed, signed by me, Matthias Faber, affirming under examination that Ilse Weiss had used the rear room of her father's print shop to produce forged baptismal certificates and false work permits. The line was bureaucratic, dry, and precise. It did not contain motive. The archive never cared why. Under it, in a different hand and from years later, a deposition dated 1946. My hand. I knew it at once. No one knows his own future handwriting, but he knows the deformities that remain when age has done with vanity. In the deposition, I described reconstructing Professor Hecht's notebook after the war from memory and surviving pages. I described the cellar, the bribes, collar, Vogt, Father Severin's silence. I described in terms as exact and as useless as mathematics before a firing squad, the third day of my interrogation in 1941. And I had written one sentence there that turned the whole cellar, the whole city, the whole miserable edifice of self-understanding inside out. I said her name on the third day because by then I had already practiced the sentence once in 1938, before I lost the power to speak it aloud. I do not know whether I made a sound then. I know only that Ilse was beside me and the page was no longer only on the crate but in my hand and in the room and in whatever organ inside a man decides whether he still belongs to himself. She reached for the sheet. I tried to stop her, too late, and her eyes moved down the page. Not all of it. Enough. When she saw her name and then mine below it, she did not gasp, curse, or step away as other people do in books when revelation is expected to entertain. She simply became very still, which is what the truly wounded do when they are not yet ready to surrender movement to pain. "What is it?" she asked. I opened my mouth. Nothing. Not hoarseness, not stammer, not panic. Nothing. She looked at me for a long second, then at the page again. "That is your signature," she said. I could not answer. Outside, the cheering grew louder. Somewhere close, glass broke. A voice in the street shouted a slogan that half the city had been storing in its teeth. Ilse folded the page once. Her hands were steady. "Can you still write?" she asked. I reached for the pencil on the crate. My fingers closed around it. I set the point to paper. Nothing moved, not because I could no longer command my hand, because the hand had become part of the record too. I felt the shape of future script inside it, waiting. The archive did not need my warning. It needed my line. She watched my failure without blinking. "Then it's true," she said. I shook my head violently, or tried to. It no longer mattered. Truth had become clerical. She took the notebook pages from the crate and stacked them with terrible neatness. Then she tore page 18 once, twice, again, methodically, down the center and across the names. She did the same to 17, 16, 15. The sound of ripping paper in that cellar was softer than the city above us and more final. When she reached the page bearing the future statement, she paused. For a moment I thought she would burn it. Instead, she folded it and slipped it into her coat. Why? To remember, to accuse, to test the world later against the sentence. There are many reasons a person keeps the worst page. She picked up the pistol. Not at me, at the door. Then she looked back once. "If the page is wrong," she said, "earn it." She slid the bolt, opened the cellar door, and went up into the shouting city. I tried to follow. My legs moved, my body obeyed. But the thing I wanted most, her name, a warning, a denial, any sound large enough to stand between her and the future document, would not come. Hecht had been exact, after all. The first name had been mine. The second had been hers. And after the second, the archive had entered. I stood in the cellar among torn pages while Austria ended upstairs. It took me some time, I cannot say how long, to understand the worst part. Not that the notebook had shown me a betrayal. Not that the betrayal was mine. The worst part was that the future sentence did not feel impossible. That was the real weapon, not prophecy. Familiarity. Vogt had understood a part of it. The police had understood another part. The church, perhaps, the least and therefore almost the most honestly. Hecht had discovered not a curse, nor divine speech, nor a mathematical scandal. He had discovered that in a century drunk on forms and stamps, a sufficiently closed sequence could couple to the future precisely because the future would be documented by men who believed every destroyed life should pass through paper on its way to ash. The notebook was contact, yes, but not with God, not with aliens, not even with history in the noble sense, and it was contact with the future office. And the future office already had a line for me. I do not know how long I remained in that cellar. Long enough for the street noise to change from exuberance to hunting. Long enough for boots to begin stopping outside Jewish shops and not moving on. Long enough for some boy with a new armband to pound on the front shutters and laugh when no one answered. When at last I climbed the stairs, the print shop was empty. Herr Weiss gone, Ilse gone. The pages destroyed except for what the archive had already placed behind my eyes. On the work table lay only one thing. The page she had taken, returned, and left face down. I turned it over. It was not the future statement. It was the 1946 deposition page in my own hand. Beneath the paragraph about the third day, there was one final line I had not read in the cellar because I had stopped at the sentence that broke me. Now I read it. I began this account in March 1938, the night the city learned how cheaply it could purchase its own voice. If you are reading this in that year, then understand. The notebook does not merely show what you will do. It shows what you have already rehearsed in miniature every time you called necessity by a better name. Below that, in the same future hand, my hand. I took the first bribe before I signed the statement. That was when the sentence started. Outside, Vienna cheered for the Germans as if applause could excuse grammar. I stood with the page in my hand and tried once more to speak Ilse's name. Nothing came, and in that silence, with the city roaring and the future archive already open somewhere ahead of me, I understood at last what Professor Hecht had really found. Not an equation, a confession, and it had been waiting in my handwriting all along.